right, welcome, guys. Looks like some people are getting let into the room now. We're excited to have you here for another webinar with us, and this may be some of your first times attending a webinar with Toronto Home Energy Network, and you picked a banger. We've been actually really looking forward to this one, and we were really excited when Louise agreed to sit down with us and talk about this topic, this healthy indoor air. And we know there's a lot of different motivations that come into wanting to improve your air quality at home. There's, of course, the pandemic and the lasting impacts of how we're thinking about air in our public spaces, and then how that came into managing things like carbon dioxide levels in our own homes. So that's really opened that box and people are thinking about it. For me, my interest is definitely with wildfires and, you know, for parts of the summer, not being able to get fresh air by opening your window and wondering, how clean is my indoor air if I'm just shutting my windows, right? So we're going to get into the weeds of that topic, and we're really excited. And we expect that there's some people here with chemical sensitivities as well, and feeling like they're in multi-unit residential buildings, and what can they actually control in their space so they don't feel like they're getting assaulted by all of these intense and aggravating odors. So we're really excited to get into the weeds of all this. And, Toronto Home Energy Network's take is really looking into combustion and how to make your home more electric and healthy that way. But we're going to cover a broad range of things today. So we're really excited about that. I see that there's a couple more people that have just been left in. So I'm going to go to the top. So I'll say that again, and then we'll start moving into the run of show here. So thank you so much for joining us tonight on a beautiful night outside as well. So I expect maybe some people are running around outside, and that's okay because we are talking about inside today. And whether you're motivated to join this webinar because the wildfire season is coming up and you're wondering how you can really improve the air quality in your home and make sure that PM 2.5 isn't getting inside and that your indoor space is actually safe, or you have chemical sensitivities, or you're an advocate thinking about how to make indoor air better in public spaces as well as your home. We are excited that you're here, and we're excited that Luis agreed to join us tonight to be our expert speaker. So with that, I'm going to jump into some of our run of show. First thing, a quick disclaimer. If you've picked up a little bit of nasally sounds in my voice, I'm a little ill. So if I have to mute suddenly and go off camera, I bear with me there. Maybe do some times tables as I collect myself. And for future recording viewers, just a little tap on that right arrow button to skip past that. So thank you for your patience with that. And if you've attended one of our webinars before, you know our land acknowledgements have a retrospective, a past-focused version, as well as an action-oriented, a more contemporary, what can you do in this moment, whether that's advocacy or supporting Indigenous businesses. So starting with the retrospective one, the traditional one, we acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It's now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis people as well. And we also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with Mississaugas of the Credit. So with that, we'll talk about what you can do today. And I know a lot of people are getting together their summer plans if they haven't already. And the US going to the States probably isn't as high on some people's lists as it used to be. Maybe if you have family, you got to visit, but I know a lot of people are really going deep on exploring Canada this summer and our beautiful nation. So there's actually a couple of native tourism, indigenous tourism collectives that have been brought together by the provincial governments of Ontario and the Quebec governments that bring together all these different experiences, some interesting stays that you can do with Indigenous communities, some guided hikes, and all of these great different experiences, especially around Ottawa and Montreal. So if you find yourself in that direction, I definitely recommend checking out these websites. And Jake, my colleague there, has posted some links in the chat there. So definitely bookmark those and check those out when you have some time and you're planning your summer getaways. Tonight's agenda, we're going through that intros and housekeeping piece. Our first speaker is going to be our expert speaker. Louise will get into the monitoring your indoor air, common sources of indoor air pollution, just have a really solid summary and some action items there. So we're very grateful that she joined us tonight. It's really exciting. I'm going to jump in after that. I'm going to be talking about alternatives to burning gas in your home. Combustion obviously releases a lot of nasty particles into the air, but it's not always clear what you can do about it and what you should switch for what, how you should prioritize those things. And also getting into some of the things you can do when wildfire season rolls in as well. And from there, we'll move into the Q&A. So that's just a way of saying we'll move through the presentations and save Q&A for the end, though feel free to put your questions in chat. And my colleague Jake is in there, and we have some other knowledgeable folks in chat as well that will be very happy to answer some questions for you. If we get them answered in chat, awesome. If not, we can hold on to those till later. We definitely are recording this and we're going to put it up on our YouTube channel after. So for all the people that couldn't make it, maybe they decided a picnic outside was the thing to do tonight. But for the hardcore people here, you get to ask your questions. We love that. So thanks for coming out. And we also do a handout. So if you miss a link that goes by, or you'd really like to look at the slides or share those with your people, that all comes out. Usually the day after, given my, my little sniffles, we'll see. It might be a little bit longer, but I appreciate your patience either way. Tonight's speakers, Luis is, oh, I'm sorry, I got your, I had a typo in your name there. That's my bad. So, uh, Luis there, apologies, is the founder of Clean Indoor Air Toronto, and we'll get into what their organization does. As a chemistry PhD, so really what we're excited about is mixing these worlds of good science and monitoring and understanding, as well as communicating in a way that's accessible and action-oriented. And Luis is an excellent person to do this, so we're pumped about that. And I'm Nathan. I work for Toronto Home Energy Network, and I am the homeowner journey coordinator. What exactly that means is as you're going through this journey of upgrading your home, making it more healthy or sustainable or energy efficient, I will help you get the right pieces of information you need at the right time, whether that's a webinar recording or a guide or an introduction to another expert to make sure that that journey is as smooth and as stress-free and exciting and motivational as possible for you there. So with that, I'll turn it over to our expert speaker. So Luis, if you're ready to share screen and dive in, that's awesome. I'll stop my share here.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. And can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to switch to full screen view. And can everyone see that?
Looking good
All
to me.
right, wonderful. Okay, thanks everyone for joining tonight. So thank you, Nathan, for having me to Toronto Home Energy Network for hosting this. My name's Louise Heidinger, and I'm a chemist by training. And I also helped to found this group, Clean Indoor Air Toronto. We're dedicated to improving indoor air quality in our shared indoor spaces. And a big part of that is to try and raise awareness because I think a lot of people don't really realize what indoor air quality is and why it's so important. So just basics, indoor air quality is the quality of air in our buildings. But what does that mean? Well, good indoor air quality, acceptable indoor air quality is free air that's free of contaminants at harmful concentrations held at a comfortable temperature. And so those air contaminants could be a whole range of things. It could be air pollution from climate change. It could be human-made pollution. It could be disease-causing microbes. So why is this important? Well, because clean air, it's fundamental to human health. We spend 90% of our time indoors. We breathe 11,000 liters of air per day. And the UN has recognized access to clean air as a human right. So if you're breathing in poor air quality all the time, that's associated with higher rates of disease, poor health. It means lost productivity due to poor health, again, time lost to illness. And it also means an increased burden on our healthcare system. Conversely, good indoor air quality means improved cognition, better decision-making, increased productivity, less time lost to illness, better learning outcomes, especially for children. So let's dive into sources of pollution. So I show these pictures, and these are like these really nice home interiors. And I want everyone to take a look around their home right now and or wherever you might be, and start looking for sources of indoor air pollution, because these are stock images. They look very, very nice, but I'll tell you now, there's several sources in these photos that I can spot right away. So I want to actually jump right into it because we don't have too much time, but I want to jump right in and take a look at, what are these different sources of air pollution? All right, so here's my cartoon home. And first, let's take a look at the bedroom. So I'm sorry to say, if you like scented candles or misters or humidifiers or room scents, okay, that's a major source of air pollution. Any type of fabric, so bedding or clothing that's made from synthetic textiles, so nylon, polyester, polyamide, these are actually types of plastics. And so any type of friction or abrasion will end up releasing tiny little microfibers, which are actually microplastics. Then we can get, if we move on to the bathroom, this is an area where obviously there can be high humidity, especially if you've got poor ventilation. So with high humidity comes mold growth. This is where we also find lots of scented personal care products. And then something that people don't really realize is that the aerosols from toilet flushes can carry infectious diseases. So if you got somebody in the household with norovirus, this is a prime area for where this can happen, like disease transmission. Let's move on to another part of the house. So if there's somebody in the household or somebody outside the house who smokes cigarettes, vapes, that's a source of pollution. If you like to burn incense, well, that's burning something, so that's producing pollution. Pet dander, carpeting. Carpeting is almost always made out of a synthetic, like nylon or polyester. So again, any type of abrasion, and it'll start to release microplastics. How about this? Okay, so let's move down into the living room. A gas or wood fireplace, even with a chimney, some of the emissions from burning the natural gas or burning the wood will escape into the living areas. So that's something to be aware of. And again, we have, synthetic textiles or upholstery. Again, any type of friction, it'll start to release microplastics. Moving on into the kitchen, gas stove. Okay, that's a big one. There's always going to be a very low level of leakage from any gas line inside the house. So if you've got a gas range, unfortunately, that is leaking a little bit of natural gas into the indoor environment. Cooking emissions as well is something that people aren't really aware of, because, we associate cooking with, wonderful cooking smells, but that is also releasing fine particulates, better known as PM 2.5, as well as oil aerosols, like little tiny aerosols, which you really don't want to breathe in and get into your lungs. Let's move on to the garage. This is where people usually store things like, like a gasoline, like a jerry can, cleaning solvents, paints, paint thinner. These will all emit volatile organic compounds, VOCs. This is also where people put their car or gardening equipment, snowblower, generator, anything which has a gas tank in it, that'll be releasing emissions, especially if, the temperature starts to rise. All right, so let's move down onto the basement. We've got our fossil fuel burning furnace and water heater. There's lots of homes across the city that are sitting in flood-prone areas. So if there is a flood, water gets into the basement, or there's a leak of some kind, then that can induce mold growth. So clothes made out of synthetic textiles. Here we are in the laundry area. Again, if you wash them, if you put them through the dryer, they will release some microplastics. And that'll be from the dryer exhaust, any lint. And then we've also got cleaning products with fragrance or solvents. So just to recap our major sources. So our gas burning appliances. So they will be releasing, when we burn natural gas, we're releasing CO2, carbon dioxide, but also carbon monoxide, fine particulates, or PM 2.5, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, volatile organic compounds, VOCs, and nitrogen oxides. We also have to be concerned about building materials. And this is especially the case in older homes. We might find asbestos. There might be heavy metals. So an older house might have a lead-based paint. Then there's the plastics that are often used in building materials, fiberglass insulation, and then pigments and dyes. Okay, and let's take another look at another source, which is all of the synthetic textiles which are found in the home environment. So this covers everything from clothing all the way through to soft furnishings, carpeting, upholstery, curtains. All these things are often made from synthetics like polyester and nylon, and any kind of friction or abrasion. And just with like general exposure to the elements, they will start to release microplastics. If you've Scotch guarded anything, unfortunately, Scotch guard is a major source of perfluorinated alkylated substances, or PFAS as they're better known. And these are known as forever chemicals because they don't break down on any known time scale at regular room temperature. Synthetic dyes, VOCs, which can come from the manufacturing process, can release as off-gassing. Other household products, very similar list of chemicals that they can emit into the environment. And again, this is because they're made of very much the same thing, plastics that contain dyes. So I want to take us back to this image again, because I want to point out two things which I haven't talked about. I covered all these indoor sources, and the hint is with the pet dander. So there's pets in here somewhere, but there's also people, the people who live in this house. So people and pets can also produce air contaminants. And there's also outdoor sources. So say, for example, here in this basement here, we can have radon down at the bottom here. So let's take a closer look at what can come from humans and pets. So this really came to the fore with the COVID-19 pandemic, the realization that there are actually a lot of diseases which can be transmitted through the air, and especially when the space is poorly ventilated and there's not enough air filtration. So there's a whole range of different diseases which can be caused by airborne microbes, that's bacteria, viruses, and fungi. I've given some examples here on the side, so like Legionella bacteria, zoonotic diseases, which come from inhaling aerosolized animal feces. So everyone has probably heard about hantavirus in the news. Another example is toxoplasmosis from cat feces, fungal diseases from inhaling mold, and then, of course, infectious viruses and bacteria. So I've given in this diagram how this happens. Say you have somebody in the household who has a viral infection, they will be breathing out that virus every time they breathe, talk, speak. And if that space is poorly ventilated, that virus is going to start to accumulate in the space, and that really increases the risk of transmission to somebody else in the space. In terms of outdoor sources, we live in Toronto. It's a very densely populated urban environment, and there are a lot of different sources. So I've just given some examples here. So exhaust from cars, trains, aircraft, any form of transportation, it's almost always gas burning. So it will produce emissions. Buildings also produce emissions as well because so many buildings are reliant on a gas burning furnace or water heater for heating the water. Construction is also a major source of pollution. It creates dust. The concrete itself is a major like CO2 emitter. Then we've got heavy industry. So we're nearby Hamilton, so there's a steel mill there. We've got the gas plant down in the Portlands. Then there's smoking and vaping, of course. Pesticides is something I actually want to highlight here because this is a growing practice, especially in the residential neighborhoods in Toronto, where, and this is kind of preying on people's fear of biting insects like mosquitoes and ticks. And so, landscaping companies are, selling this service where somebody comes and fogs an entire property with pesticide. And this is incredibly polluting, because they are using a gas-powered sprayer, and then there's the pesticide formulation itself. Then we got plastic trash, and then radon, of course. So just to quickly cover emissions by sector, here in Toronto, our number one cause of emissions or source of emissions is buildings, followed very closely by transportation. And then across Ontario, transportation takes over as our number one cause of emissions, and then followed by buildings. Oh, so actually industry and buildings. Okay, so fossil fuel combustion really is like a major cause of air pollution. So this is any type of combustion engine, whether we're talking cars or aircraft, all the way down to gas furnaces. Because any time you're burning fossil fuels, you're producing carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas, fine particulates and ultrafine particulates, nitrogen oxides, incomplete products of combustion, including aromatic compounds and polycyclic aromatic compounds, VOCs and SVOCs, which are semi-volatile organic compounds, and ozone. And plus, there's also the non-exhaust pollution, and that's coming from particulates from tires, brakes, road abrasion. So I want to focus in on the fine and ultrafine particulates because I don't think people realize just how dangerous this type of pollution is. This is a diagram that gives you a sense of the size comparison. So like on the left-hand side, we've got beach sand, a grain of sand. And on the right-hand side, we've got fine particulate, PM2.5. And these are particles which have an average diameter of 2.5 micrometers or less. And these are small enough to pass from the air that you breathe directly through the membrane in your lungs and into your bloodstream. So that's an issue because these particles can carry with them all these other very dangerous chemicals like the aromatic compounds and the polycyclic aromatic compounds, which are actually known to be carcinogenic. Ultrafine particulates are PM 0.1 or 100 nanometers or less inside. These are so tiny, they're nanoparticles, that they will actually behave like gases. They are too small to actually settle, so they'll be carried by air currents for long distances. And because of that small size, they'll actually carry quite a bit further into your body by the bloodstream. So what are these particulates made of? Well, I mentioned before the issue with plastics. And the thing is, plastics don't actually break down on any like human time scale. Estimates range from 30,000 years all the way up to 100,000 years. But in practical terms, it's many, many millennia. So when we throw out plastics, exposure to the elements will start to break them down into smaller and smaller pieces. And then to the point where they're small enough that they can become airborne. So the thing is, chemists have found micro and nanoplastics in every single environment on Earth, everywhere, water, soil, air, it's everywhere. And this is important to know because this is actually our main route of exposure to pollution because we breathe in 11,000 liters of air per day. So this is something we should be aware of and something we need to manage for sure. In terms of ultrafine particulates, now the whole expansion, proposed expansion of the Billy Bishop Airport has been in the news a lot, and with good reason, because jet engines are actually a major source of UFPs, and that's because of the intense heat and pressure that is happening inside a jet engine. And so it can give rise to these tiny little nanoparticles, much of which is composed of unburned jet fuel and jet engine oil. And so what happens with the intense high temperature and pressure, this jet oil actually vaporizes and it comes shooting out of the engine and then it starts to nucleate, condense on itself to form these little nanoparticles. So that's why, having this source of pollution near densely populated areas is probably not a good idea. Jet engines create smaller size UFPs compared to road engines, like road vehicles. So this isn't just like a downtown, waterfront problem because they're so light, because they can be carried for great distances. This is, should be of concern to everybody in the city. All right, so we can also get air pollution due to climate change. So wildfires produce wildfire smoke, PM2.5, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, VOCs, nitrogen oxides. Flooding also actually produces air pollution as well. So with torrential rains, that produces aerosols. It also creates contaminated dust. So when you have flooding, that flood water will sweep through an area, pick up all sorts of stuff from the ground, and then it'll dry, and then that dust, if it gets disturbed, will go up into the air, and then somebody can breathe that in. It also can kick up disease-causing microbes from the water and the soil. With climate change, we're getting a weakened jet stream. And so this has happened a number of times through the winter, where we've gotten stagnant air accumulating over the city, and then that traps like all the pollution coming off of the traffic and the buildings, and then we get poor air quality days. So where are we today with indoor air quality? All right. So the ventilation standard we have, it's something called ASHRAE standard 62.1 and 62.2. ASHRAE stands for the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, Air Conditioning Engineers. And they're the standard setting body for many jurisdictions around the world. So this standard is incorporated into the Ontario Building Code. And unfortunately, it's not designed to handle fine particulate air pollution and also infectious aerosols. So like microbes, including airborne diseases. So the thing is, buildings are built to the standard that existed at the time. And what we know as acceptable air quality only came about through improvements to standard 62.1 and 62.2 back in the early 1990s. So there's many, many buildings that are built before the 1990s, early 90s. And so those were built, before we had what would be considered acceptable air quality. And so it's really on the building owner to keep updating to make sure that there's good air quality inside. But unfortunately, we assume that there is compliance to the standard, but it's never verified, not until somebody inside the building complains. And there's many buildings that don't meet the current standard. So we don't have a legally enforceable standard that defines clean and safe indoor air. And we don't have an indoor air quality policy or legislation at any level of government. So that's kind of led to a patchwork. So some places have an indoor air quality policy. So say, for example, City of Toronto, they have an indoor air quality policy for their offices, but that means there's many, many other buildings across the city that lack adequate ventilation, filtration, and a lot of times air conditioning. So recognizing the fact that indoor air quality is becoming an important issue, it's been neglected for decades. Health Canada published in September 2025 a document called Guidance for Indoor Air Quality Professionals, which I'm just going to sum up really quickly here. There's a number of key items in here which are really important to know. The first thing is that diseases can be caused by microbes and they can be airborne. So bacteria, viruses, fungi, they can spread via infectious aerosols that remain suspended in the air, and they can travel for longer distances than the 2 meter or 6 feet rule that was talked about at the early times of the pandemic. That carbon dioxide, CO2, is tied to symptoms, and it's an indicator of ventilation. So indoors, the main source of CO2 is people breathing. And then when CO2 rises over 800 ppm, the incidence of symptoms starts to rise. So we can use CO2 level to assess ventilation in spaces. And the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers has stated that we want to keep it under 800 ppm. That's a prudent target. So Health Canada has also given some tips on how to protect and maintain good indoor air quality. First thing off, we want to reduce and eliminate the source of air contaminants. Next, we want to ventilate to bring in fresh air, but we got to filter that air at the same time. And then we have to keep filtering our indoor air. At the same time, we also need an indoor air quality policy to make sure there's regular building maintenance, there's prompt moisture remediation, and that there's education for the building occupants so they know what to do. All right, so let's jump into improving indoor air quality. And I'm going to let Nathan cover this in a bit more detail, because first thing off is we want to remove sources of combustion inside the house and near the house. So replacing the gas burning furnaces with like a heat pump or an induction stove, avoiding gas powered equipment. So things like lawnmowers and leaf blowers. In terms of other things, take a look around your home and start thinking about transitioning away from plastics. So whether that be synthetic textile or the plastic storage containers that are used in the kitchen. So move to natural fibers, which are compostable. Switch to hard flooring instead of carpeting, and then use like glass and steel. VOCs is a major source coming from scented products. So if you switch to unscented products, that really helps. And this is really something for um, it's really helpful for people who are hypersensitive or have multiple chemical sensitivities. This will really help people who have these issues getting rid of scented products. All right. So how do we know we have poor air quality? Well, we need to monitor the air. So I am showing here the ARANET 4 home CO2 monitor. And this is considered to be the most accurate CO2 monitor that's available on the market. It has something called a non-dispersive infrared and sensor in it. And like I said, this is really used to monitor your ventilation rate. And so like I said before, good ventilation is indicated by CO2 below 800 parts per million. When you're doing this measurement, though, you have to do it when people are actually in the room. So if you're, you have a dinner party, you've got lots of people over, this is actually when you want to take a CO2 measurement, because this is when you can see if your HVAC system or whatever ventilation system you have is actually doing what it's supposed to do. When your CO2 starts to rise above 1,000, that's when we know fresh air supply isn't keeping up. We're not getting enough ventilation. This also happens to measure relative humidity, and that's something else we need to keep an eye on, because if you rise above 60% relative humidity, then the risk of mold growth really starts to increase. We also want to stay above 40%, because below 40% is associated with increased risk of viral transmission. And that probably has something to do with, if it gets too dry, this can compromise the barrier function in your upper airways. Now, if you want to take this for a whirl and test it out, the ARANET CO2 monitors are actually available for loan from the digital innovation hubs of Toronto Public Library. So I just want to show some examples of poor indoor air quality indicated by poor ventilation. So members of our group have CO2 monitors. They take them around, and I've asked people to take photographs of where they see poor air quality, because the thing is, we often assume the air is fine because we don't see or smell anything. But actually, the only way to know is if you're actually monitoring. So here are some examples of really poor air quality. On the left-hand side, this was taken during a recital at a music school at a second-story walk-up. You can see it's 4,000 ppm. On public transit, we routinely spot CO2 levels well over 2,000. And on the right-hand side, we've got, this was at the History Music Hall, which is down at Queen and Woodbine. And that is the highest reading we have ever seen. At that level, about 10% of the air is rebreathed air. So it's been through somebody else's lungs. And so if somebody is sick in that space, there's a really good chance that somebody else might end up breathing in that air. All right, moving on to PM 2.5 and VOCs. This is a TEM-top M10 Plus monitor. And this monitor measures a number of different parameters. It measures PM 2.5, total VOCs, also CO2 and relative humidity and temperature. So fine particulates, like I said, they're really dangerous. And this is a way to measure how good your filtration is. If you happen to have portable air filters in the space, or if you're just relying on the furnace filter in your HVAC system. So we want to aim for a upper threshold, this is coming from Health Canada, of 15 micrograms per cubic meter in 1 hour, or as low as reasonably achievable. You want to compare the outdoor PM 2.5 with your indoor PM 2.5. So I've shown here in this photograph, it's 4.6 micrograms per cubic meter. And this was actually me doing an experiment. I put this in my kitchen, and then I started heating up a slice of pizza in the toaster oven. And it's usually around 0.1. It rose up to 4.6. I didn't show the highest level I got, which was when I was doing some stir frying, and it hit like 250, which was kind of scary. TVOCs is volatile organic compounds. And this, again, it's elevated here in this picture because this is when I'm doing cooking. And so this is measuring total volatile organics. So that's including anything that could be harmful, anything that could be not harmful. But this is useful for somebody who has multiple chemical sensitivities where they can place this monitor near a window, near a doorway, and this will give them advance warning of VOCs that might be entering their space. All right, now this is carbon monoxide and radon. So the city of Toronto enacted a new bylaw at the beginning of the year. It came into force, and that means every home that has a fuel burning appliance, fireplace, or attached garage has to have a carbon monoxide monitor. So here are just the thresholds for this particular monitor, the first alert one. For radon monitors, they're recommended, but they're not required in Toronto. But the thing is to know that 7% of buildings in Toronto do have an issue with radon. So the deal is if you have one of these, you would have it in the basement, you would have it just monitoring for at least a few weeks. And this is again where we can see if ventilation is adequate, because if it's not, then radon is going to start accumulating. The limit here is 200 becquerels per cubic meter. So just quickly, ventilation, we want to keep it under 800 parts per million. Things you can do, open windows and doors, and this is only if it's a good air quality day. Keep your HVAC setting to on while the room is occupied. This is really important to know because as soon as you turn your ventilation off, you're actually no longer in compliance with ASHRAE 62.1. So you want to keep that on anytime there's somebody in the room or in the building. Check your air vents, make sure that you've got good airflow, monitor your CO2, and use fans to keep moving the air around. For filtration, MERV 13 filters. That's it. That is the recommendation coming from ASHRAE and then also Ontario Society of Professional Engineers. ASHRAE actually updated 62.1 last year to state that the minimum should be MERV 11 now, but likely there's lots of people across the city who don't have even a MERV 11. Portable air filters and cleaners, you want to know what the CADR is, the clean air delivery rate, and you also want to know what the noise level is, because if it's too noisy, no one's going to use it. So then what is it? Then it's just going to be a piece of furniture. All right. So last thing I want to mention is to avoid the air cleaning technologies. I've given a bunch of examples here across the top here. So UV, ozone producing machines, electrostatic precipitation, hydrogen peroxide, hydroxyl radicals. These are all not good things. These are all either oxidants, as in they will oxidize other chemicals, or they produce oxidizing chemicals. And so when you have an oxidizing agent, it will want to react with other things. And considering our indoor space already contains a number of indoor air pollutants, if you put in an oxidizing agent in there, chances are very high you're going to start producing the equivalent of indoor smog. All right, so that brings me to the end, and I'll pass over to Nathan.
All right, that's awesome. I mean, a couple things that really jumped into my mind there was, well, when I sold my air purifier in my apartment, I was surprised at how much of what I was cleaning out was textile fibers. That's most of what we were pulling out of there. So that's a source that I wasn't really expecting. And I hope we have some time in the Q&A to really go into what we can do from the policy advocacy level, because I think you really highlighted how stark not having a policy at any level of government is, and I'm definitely going to ask you about that if no one else does. Like, what can we do, right? And the last thing that really stuck with me was the way you put the fact of 10% of the air being rebreathed, just rebreathed. That's gonna stick in my head. That's quite strong. So that's why we're so excited to have you. That was fantastic. So I'm gonna jump back and share my screen again. And the pieces of the puzzle that I'm going to be bringing out are very much focused around, oh, sorry. So I'll stop sharing there for a second. Are very much around that combustion in your home and how we can go about removing that particular piece from our home, as well as some notes on wildfire smoke and filtration there. Okay, so that's looking okay. Then I'm going to try to pull up my speaker notes. All right, perfect. We're looking okay there.
Mhm.
All right, awesome. So this segment I'm just calling Healthy Homes. So we've collected some advice from other people that have improved the indoor air quality in their home by removing sources of combustion. And before I dive into that success story of Torontonians named Adam and Monica in the East End, I'll just give you the very highest level of what Toronto Home Energy Network is about, and then I'll get into our supports a little bit more towards the end, and then we'll get into that Q&A. So at the very highest level, Toronto Home Energy Network, we're a nonprofit. We've got nothing to sell you. We're just trying to give you the good information at the right time so you can make the right decisions for your budget, for your values, whether that's sustainability or energy efficiency, affordability, indoor air quality. We want to get you the right information at the right time to make a proper decision for yourself. So with that, I'll get into the story of Adam and Monica. So they were newer homeowners in 2020, and they moved into Toronto's East End, and they had a bit of a nightmare moving in day. So when they bought their new home, they had the gas leak on the very first day that they entered the house. So they were able to smell this right away. So one of their first calls was not to their, friends and family, inviting them over for housewarming. It was to an Enbridge tech to come over and shut off their gas. And this really highlighted one of these background risks that we know is in any home that is burning gas, and that's combustion. That's the risk of a more serious leak, but also the background leaks of using the appliances and not being able to filter that air regularly. So there's kind of the acute and the everyday risks that are happening there. But for Adam and Monica, having that happen on the first day felt like a bit of a sign, and so they took it as good motivation to electrify their home. That is to say, remove all of the gas burning appliances from their home so that there was no more sources of carbon monoxide in their home. But what does that actually take? When I say it like that, it feels like one project, electrify your home. But their home before they renovated was fairly typical. They had a gas stove, they had a gas water heater as well. I put the AC on there. That wasn't burning gas, but it was towards the end of its life when they bought it. It was 20 years old, so that needed to be replaced as well. And their gas furnace as well. I highlight all these things because it's like people get excited about electrifying their home, and then they take the first step into it, and it can be very difficult to know which path to take first. And if you try to research all of these things at once, decision fatigue can really take over. So I hope you'll leave with some actionable steps. And then, of course, we'll get into some notes about wildfire filtration as well. So getting into the nuts and bolts of what they did, the timeline for actually removing all these sources of combustion from their home was just under 3 years. So I put that in a way to say this isn't something that's going to happen tomorrow. It's worthwhile going on a journey and having a plan and thinking about what's worth replacing first, second, and third, and getting help with those things along the way. And I'll get into what that took for them. And of course, that can be very motivational, but when it comes down to actually affording it and what it takes to make this happen, Adam and Monica shared with us that it cost them about $18,000 in total to electrify their home. And this was, again, through 2020 and those earlier years. And they got some help with rebates as well. Some of those rebates are gone, but new rebates have replaced them. So around that $20,000 mark for them was what it took to electrify their home. But I want to focus really quickly on the environmental benefits of that beyond the indoor air quality benefits. They measured the amount of carbon dioxide that was coming out of their building when they had all the gas appliances versus when they electrified. And this is something that we're always really excited to share with about homeowners' electrification journeys, as they save 2.5 tons of CO2 every year by electrifying their homes. So when you start to think about that across hundreds of thousands of single family homes and apartments across Toronto. That's very exciting. So giving some direction and getting into this healthy home hierarchy. What comes first? What comes second when you're thinking about removing sources of combustion from your home? So Luis got into it a little bit, but if we're thinking about it for a second, what's our biggest contributor to indoor air pollution typically? This would be our gas furnace. Do you think it's the gas stove? Maybe it's the gas water heater or the air conditioner. The clear winner by a lot is definitely the gas stove, as most gas furnaces are filtered fairly well, but even with the hood vent running, gas stoves produce a lot of VOCs, a lot of PM2.5, a lot of those aerosolized gases that Luis was talking about. So if you're in this position with a gas stove, I'm going to dive into that a little bit to make it a little bit scarier for a second, but then zooming out again to figure out what we can do before we touch on some of those other things that you can do to remove sources of combustion from your home. So kick the stove. I have a photo here from a CBC article. There was some researchers in Saskatchewan, and they were looking at the buildup of poor indoor air around stove use in particular. And scientists are usually fairly understated, but when they were focused on stoves in particular, they said all the researchers were pretty horrified. And that just emphasizes how the gas stove is really the first thing in that healthy home hierarchy to tackle. I saw someone in the chat was talking about benzene being particularly dangerous, and that was one of the chemicals that they were finding exists. That is a byproduct from combustion. In the same way that if you were talking to someone outside and you were standing right beside a car that was on, you'd probably move somewhere else because you don't want to breathe that exhaust in. Burning on the gas burners is also producing exhaust that has lots of nasty stuff in it as well. And again, I'm not going to stick on the scary stuff for too long, but one of the big meta studies done in 2013 demonstrated that the risk for childhood asthma increased by 42% in homes with gas stoves. So that's a massive jump in childhood asthma cases. So I'm going to ask Jake to post some links to those articles if you want to do some further reading on gas stoves. And then we'll get into the action now. Okay, what can you actually do? What's door A and door B of replacing your gas stoves? So the first thing you can do is a full replacement, and you can either do an electric coil or the newest thing is induction burners. And induction burners are really nice and are taking over the culinary world by storm. A lot of high-end kitchens are preferring to install induction stoves, not just because they're aware of how that impacts the air for their employees, but they're also finding them high performance. They're easier to tune. They actually heat up faster than gas. So they're working to decenter this idea that gas is actually the pinnacle of home cooking or modern cooking. Induction is better all across the board. So they heat up faster as well. They're super easy to clean. They're really child safe because the surfaces don't get hot. But one roadblock that I like to point out in advance that we've heard about from other Torontonians that have removed their gas stove in favor of induction is that you may need to increase the size of the electrical outlet. A lot of gas stoves just have the 120 volt, the standard plug, but usually induction stoves need the 240 volt, the big one, similar to a dryer. So in that case, that's something to keep in mind as you're thinking about replacing a gas stove. And there's one that you can do tomorrow without doing all this stuff. If I've really freaked you out, that's buying a portable induction cooktop. So these are just simple plug-in ones that you can place on top of your gas burners. And instead of using the gas burner, you can turn on your induction cooktop. And the great thing about that is it's a simple purchase you can make online right now. They're usually coming around $200 and $300. And that means you don't have to turn the gas burners on your stove again, and you can just be using this induction cooktop instead. Of course, if you use the oven to bake something, you're still going to be having those fumes, but it at least removes a big source there. So the next bit, maybe you don't have a gas stove and I've been boring you out of your mind. This next part is more for you because the next piece in the healthy home hierarchy, most people do have gas water heaters or gas furnaces. So the next question then is, should I replace the furnace next or should I replace the water heater next? What really makes sense for me? And with that, I'll say, which one's going to die first? Which one is older with a little bit of an asterisk on it? If your furnace is only a couple years old and your water heater is 15 or 20 years old. We know that as equipment ages, it starts to get cracks, it's not performing well, it's costing you more money, but the amount of carbon monoxide and PM 2.5 that it's producing, older equipment is degrading, it's not burning as efficiently, it's coming out of cracks. So replacing older equipment first is definitely a win, not just for your wallet, but for your indoor air quality as well. But I'll put a little asterisk there, and that's because even though the furnace is only on in the winter, it burns a lot more gas than your water heater. So something around 80% of the gas that you're burning in a year is going to be coming from your furnace. And though your water heater is still working in the summer when the furnace is not, this is still the biggest source. So if the time to die is about similar, if their lifespans are about similar, the furnace is the thing that you're going to be thinking about first. And what can you replace it with? What's the right timeline for that? Furnace replacements is something we spend a lot of time talking about in our first heat pump guidebook. If you're new to heat pumps, all it means is it's something that can heat your home and cool your home. And if you're looking to remove all sources of combustion and remove your gas furnace, a heat pump is something that you're going to install. So it will keep you cozy all winter and cool all summer and massively reduce your reliance on fossil fuels. So that's why we're really excited about heat pumps. Most of what we talk about at Toronto Home Energy Network is heat pumps, getting people excited, which is why we've written this guide here, which we'll post in the link and will be in the handout and the recording description. Of course, this is a really good first stop for understanding this really cool technology. And in this guidebook, we talk about how 15 years is about the industry standard for replacement timing. We've heard, of course, of furnaces lasting longer than that, but when we're talking to technicians, that's about the time that people are thinking about replacing them. If you don't know how old your furnace is, I'll cue Jake. We wrote a little article on that. You can get the serial number or look at your maintenance tags, and you'll be able to tell how old it is from that. So with that, I'll move over to talking about wildfire pollution really quickly, and then we'll open it up to Q&A after a little bit of a discussion on what Toronto Home Energy Network does and how we can actually help you on this path to removing combustion from your home. So again, we hate seeing headlines like this, Toronto's air quality ranked worst in the world. Again, that's the again is what got me on this one, right? So this is what we hate to see and what we hope to be able to improve in our own homes and take action on that. So does staying inside really help? It can, with some upgrades, right? So I want to talk about what we can actually do in our homes. So Louise talked a lot about getting your standalone air purifiers, and I saw in the chat someone was already talking about what is the best way to purify the air in your home if you have a ducted home that is, a furnace moving air through. And when I first started putting together the content for this webinar, I thought the advice for a ducted home versus a ductless home would be very different. But as far as something you can do today and do something very quickly, just buying a standalone air purifier is the best advice for both homes. Ducted homes, you can install fairly pricey HEPA filters built into the ductwork to have more intense, almost hospital level filtration going into your homes. But of course, that's another home renovation project, whereas buying a standalone filter and moving that into the occupied rooms or having one in the living room and one in the bedroom is something you can do right now, and that does massively improve your air quality. So taking off my Toronto Home Energy Network hat for a second, I've done this in my apartment, putting on my personal hat, where I did some research, and this again isn't an endorsement from Toronto Home Energy Network, but I looked at Dark Horse Air, and they had some awesome examples as well as great educational resources to help you understand the differences between different air purifiers and when they'd work. We're motivated to look into that, of course, because of wildfires, but also our landlord, a wonderful man on the third floor, loves his pipe tobacco, and the smell would get into our house. Since installing a standalone air purifier, that's been totally removed. So we're really grateful for that. But an even more basic option is building your own air purifier or a Corsi Rosenthal box. These were really popular during COVID, but you can put this together for $100 and a couple hours just by going to the department store. And this is If you really need to get control of your air quality now and you can't make a big renovation to your home, this is something that you can do. And I'll ask Jake to put a link to this great video. UC Davis College of Engineering put together an awesome DIY build your own Corsi Rosenthal box there. And the reason, again, I talked about ductless and ductless homes is the MERV 13 filter that can go in your ductwork and help filter that air. Comes with a word of caution, and that is that upgrading your filters for your heat pump, your AC and furnace can seem like an obvious choice. Better filtration is great, but there's a risk. And I'll use a quick analogy. If you imagine you're having to, blow a ball across a table, but there's something in your way, blowing through a mesh strainer, it's going to block the air a little bit, but it wouldn't be too bad. But if you put something with a more dense weave, like an N95 mask, you're going to get a lot of blowback and it's going to be harder and harder, and you're going to exhaust yourself very quickly trying to blow that ball across the table. And so that analogy works for your motor, for your HVAC system. The denser or the higher MERV the filter is, the denser it is, and the harder the motor has to work to actually push air through it. And it's not like it won't give up and say, okay, I don't need to do this task. The motor will just keep working at that increased capacity, which wears it down and shortens the equipment's lifetime. Which brings me back again to that idea that a standalone filter that's really good, HEPA air quality, is still the most basic, easy thing that you can do. And then looking at your existing filters today and making sure you're replacing those regularly. Replace them when they're dirty. I'm not trying to be a smartass with that. It's just the outdoor air quality is constantly changing, which means that the amount of dirty air your filter has to filter is also changing. So putting a recurring reminder in your calendar to check that out, or tying filter replacement dates to holidays, is a great way to make sure that doesn't get lost. So the last thing I'll say before I zoom through our different supports and we open up the Q&A there is there's this great thing called snooping. So as Louise talked about, gas stoves and all gas appliances, they can have little gaps and cracks where CO and PM 2.5 are leaking out. And something that homeowners can do is they can go with a liquid solution. We're not talking about this Snoopy, but a different Snoopy, and work down the lines, especially where pipes are connecting and you're having slow leaks, with a liquid solution. And if you spread the liquid solution on the lines and it starts to bubble up, you can tell that there's some gas leaking out of those spots. So what I'll cue Jake to do now is throw up a poll. Hearing about this snooping, something that I've been thinking about in the background is whether this is a service that people actually are interested, if volunteers or someone in the neighborhood would come by with this liquid solution and start spraying it on the joints or the gas lines that are visible and trying to find this. If that's something that you would actually encourage in your home, if that's something that you'd want to do yourself, or if that just seems like a little bit out of range for what you're interested in. So I'm just very curious to hear what people feel about that. So that poll is up right now, and I appreciate you taking a look at that, and I'll let Jake keep that up for a couple minutes. So I'll just zoom through these last pieces, which are just talking about Toronto Home Energy Networks, the way we help you. We talked about our first heat pump guidebook that's free to download on our website, and it's just really written for people who are brand new to heat pumps, and it puts the heat pump in context of incentives and the other systems in your home. It gives you real prices, helps you find contractors. We really wrote it as an all-in-one resource that'll help kick off your heat pump journey. So I'd highly recommend checking that out on our website. It's thenetwork.to/guidebook, and we'll post the link in the handout that we send out too. We also have great online supports. The Home Retrofit Forum on Facebook is one of these highly moderated, very thoughtful, very useful Facebook groups where people put all sorts of very helpful questions and answers on there. So I definitely recommend checking those out if you are going down this electrification journey and you're getting stuck. This Facebook group can be really helpful. We also do heat pump parties around the city where we gather neighbors together who have electrified their homes, people like Adam and Monica, and they host and they talk about exactly what it took and how much it cost them. And those can be really great opportunities for learning more and asking very in-depth questions about your own home. We share those invites to the heat pump parties on our newsletter. So that's the network.to/newsletter, and I'll share that link in the handout as well. And we have these awesome partner communities all over the city in the Pocket in the East End, Riverdale. Centrally with Seton Village and Harvard Village. More in the north, we have Bedford Park and Parkdale High Park and Mimico bringing up the west side that are helping us organize these heat pump parties and connecting people with the right experts and resources as they go. So with that, that's going to be the end of my presentation. And I just want to say thank you to our speakers for joining us. And thank you for you guys for coming in on a beautiful evening and having this discussion about indoor air quality, which is really awesome. And I'll end the recording now.